Hello and welcome, Geoff. How are you doing today?
Really good, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining the show. Now, I'm always privileged to see people's where they operate in their background. Is that a map behind you, or is that?
No, behind me is a kind of like a weird, kind of nothing abstract, really. Just kind of
Oh,
made the space more interesting. But that was about
okay.
it. And the rest of it is all lots of memorabilia. You can probably tell although there's kind of golf in one corner, I'm not massively into golf. I'm actually a big football fan.
Okay. Which team, dare I ask? As a Chelsea fan, I am. So
A fairly depressed fan at the moment. I'm a Man United supporter. Since,
yes.
uh,
Okay.
and they're not great.
Yeah, I mean, not to date the podcast, but we sit here on the 1st of October, I think, and obviously coming off the back of a 3-0 loss to Spurs. But we won't
Yeah, that
we
was
won't delve too much into that. Thank you. Sorry, I thought it was a map of sort of the world dominance of DMG events and all the different locations that you're in. But
no, we're still working on that.
okay, so Geoff, we've got a lot to get through, so we're going to get stuck in. What I'd like to do before we sort of talk about present day and what you're up to is just roll all the way back as far as you wish. I'd like to get a sense of how you got into the media publishing events world. I know from what I've read, if I'm not mistaken, that you did a law degree. Was that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so I went off, did a law degree. I think it was something my family wanted me to do. I had a single mother, and we struggled when I was young, which wasn't a bad thing because it kind of taught me a work ethic and made me realize the value of things. But I think because I came from an era which is gone now, really, where you were very supported, particularly in the UK, in education and everything else. As someone without much money, I had the privilege of being able to be funded to go to university to study law. And I think my mother really hoped that if I was a lawyer, then we'd be safe forever. And so I did it. Being a dutiful son and loving my family, I did it. And I enjoyed it. And it was a great degree, and I made a lot of great friends. But I realized, I think pretty much into my first year, that whilst I would complete it, because nobody in life wants to be a quitter, and I did complete it, and I got my professional qualifications as well, I knew I wasn't going to pursue it. The thing I enjoyed most at the time was writing for the university newspaper called Red Brick, and I actually decided I wanted to be a journalist, not necessarily because journalism was my thing. I probably wasn't a very good writer, I'm sure, but I wanted, I think, like a lot of young people, to have a sense of purpose. Something that where in life you felt that you didn't just come to work, but you came to work to do something. But I think I was terrible at interviewing, and nobody offered me a job as a journalist. And I did get offered, though, a job through EMAP, selling advertising space on computer magazines, with a promise that if I kind of behaved, did a good job, they'd probably switch me into editorial. And working on computer magazines in the early 80s was incredibly exciting. It was moving where computing suddenly was becoming available to everyone. It was changing the world. There was Moore's law every day of the week. The power of processing doubled and the price of it halved. And so it was very exciting times. And just when I thought I was going to move finally into journalism, EMAP announced they were launching an events business, and then confused me considerably by saying, look, please go into this, see how you like it. And if you don't, then we'll honor our promise and you can be a journalist. So I went into it thinking, I'm probably not going to like this, but I'll do it just to kind of crowd please and see if I get the job I want. And I went into it, and a long time ago now, and never looked back. Absolutely loved it. I think I found my sense of purpose. I realized that events are so much more than a lot of people imagine. When you go to emerging markets, they're gateways to new economies. They open up all kinds of incredible trading relationships. Any trade show in any country is always full of innovation. That's where you'll see the latest products. That's where you'll see what will happen next. And that's where people will share ideas about what happens next. And I think if you're passionate about events and you look at it from that perspective as a sense of purpose, then I think you will put forward the best events. You won't just see them as transactional, as selling space and putting on speakers, but you'll understand that you can change an industry or change a country, change a point of view. You can use your event to make progress. And so all that time, 40 years plus ago, I found my career by total accident. Probably,
Yeah.
I'm sure on your show, Dan, you've seen that with an
Yeah,
awful lot of
everyone.
people.
Yeah, absolutely. Very few. Maybe I think today, because actually there are degrees, whatever you think of event management degrees or a degree within the event space, but I think more and more now people coming through are choosing it in an intentional way. But yes, you're right. People that have been in the industry for a number of years seem to have fallen into it. You brought back nostalgic memories of computers in the 80s. I had a ZX Spectrum and a Commodore 64, and I remember my friend had a Commodore 128, or the it was like everyone was jealous of him. Interesting that you say you fell into it. I'm just thinking that you did the law degree, but then you did take, I guess, and I'm interested to see if there's a parallel between your later career and when you first started. You took some calculated risks, right? In that story that you just told me, you were willing to try something that you didn't think, or you didn't know that you were going to be good at. It was a new sort of venture for you. Do you think that's run throughout your career? Have you always been that? Had that been part of your upbringing? The reason like you were willing to take this risk?
Yeah. I think some people kind of will curse their upbringing for whatever reason. Some people because they didn't have much money when they were a kid, and I didn't have much money when I was a kid. But actually, for me, I think that was good. I think it kind of set me up, and it made me always want to try and find a way to win, to always be open to trying new things. And I think you're spot on. I wasn't worried about taking risks because I kind of came from somewhere where I had nothing to lose. So, It's kind of easy, right? If you don't have anything more is more. And so you're open to risks. And so I always found that I was very entrepreneurial, even at university. I opened up a club at university and joined loads of people, and then took in quite a lot of money and threw loads of parties. So I found that
that's an event. Those were events. So obviously it was in your blood somewhere.
I think you're right. It probably wasn't my DNA back from university days. I just didn't notice it till later. But yeah, it must have been there.
Yeah, interesting. Obviously you're sitting in Dubai now, but you had a good 10-year stint before DMG Events, if I'm not mistaken, in Dubai. Talk to me about that period, setting up the business with Mesa, and how then that led to you becoming involved with DMG Events.
Yeah, so I'll backtrack very quickly. So after EMAP launching a whole load of computer shows then and finding I loved it, I later actually joined an entrepreneur in the UK called Richard Heese, who had a business back then. And at 25, I actually coming back to what you were saying about taking risks, I got offered my first MD's role at a very young age and knew quite likely I was too young, but again, was happy to take the risk and try and learn, and did. And he was an entrepreneur. I think that made me become entrepreneurial. From that, I went on to join Haymarket, who worked at that point in exhibitions. And I joined a really nice guy who I love called Peter Osborne. And together we launched Haymarket exhibitions and then BBC Haymarket exhibitions. And that took me into very large scale consumer shows. And it's amazing what you learn in life, right? Because now I do trade shows, but sometimes I use a lot of the techniques from consumer shows to try and make the trade shows a lot more lively and fun. And I think you can use ideas and cross-fertilize what you do from the ideas you pick up at different points in your career. And then, as you say, in the early 90s, I was offered a job to come to Dubai. And again, having a sense of adventure and always wanting to take on a challenge, I took it with the promise that make Dubai work and then also run the Far East office. So in the mid-90s, I ran Middle East and Far East. And I was really happy because I found that now I was learning again, because in your life you can always learn new things. And I'd learned how to do events, but now I was learning how to survive and thrive in emerging markets, where you very quickly realize that the people you deal with have to buy you first before they actually buy anything from you. You have to build and forge relationships and win trust. And that was a great learning lesson in both the Middle East and the Far East. And again, with setting up new businesses, which I always seem to have done with EMAP, with Haymarket, and again with IR new divisions, it was always about launching, always about creating new events, always about organic growth. So in 98, as you alluded to, I set up my own business with a partner, Michael El Nial, and we launched a series of shows in Dubai and some in Turkey a long time ago, and went out there and just tried to see if now finally having worked for others, we could succeed on our own. And whilst it was at times incredibly tough, like for any business, I think any entrepreneur will tell you that the biggest thing you fight against half the time is cash flow. Quite often, actually, on paper, you've made a profit, but in reality, when you're paying for the venue for the next year, there's nothing in the bank. And so survival as an entrepreneur is one of the biggest skills you can have. And I learned that, and we sold the business to Messe Frankfurt, and we were lucky, did really well. And that was a great period of my life. And also, I think, instilled my love of Dubai, because Dubai really encourages actually entrepreneurs. It has that kind of culture. It's a trading center for the region, and it backs people who have a go.
And you referenced there some individuals that you've worked with, helped you on the way, partnered with, mentored. How important were those individuals, and generally do you think individuals can have on a career or someone that wants to set up a business? Do you think you could have done it by yourself, or were they absolutely instrumental in what you've achieved?
No, it's absolutely massive. Actually, I had a fantastic call with some of the UFI event directors to go to the new UFI Event Director Summit. And someone said, could you do a call with them and tell them about your experience? And many of them asked exactly your question, Dan, which is, has it all come from you? And I told them, actually, no, I'm a composite, right? I think as so many people are, is that when you work for different companies and deal with different people, you observe their worst qualities and try your best. You don't always succeed, but to promise yourself you won't replicate their worst qualities. But then you look at people you admire and you try and take their best qualities. So I admired Richard Heath because he was a serial entrepreneur and he would never give in. And I knew that was a very important quality, underestimated actually, just the resilience of an entrepreneur. So I learned that from Richard. From Peter Osborne at Haymarket, enormous flair and a big personality, always able to sit with anybody and strike up a relationship. And he had a wonderful skill in doing that, extraordinary. And I tried to copy that. And then later with my business partner, Michael Al-Nayal, he was just a great deal maker. And that's why I chose him as a business partner, just extraordinary at always finding a way to come up with some kind of deal fit for a customer and to make it right as well. Very authentic, didn't come up with a bad deal for them, but it could always work out a way. Even if we went into a meeting and they were screaming no, you'd leave the meeting with him and they'd be screaming yes. And so Michael was the deal maker. So many people I've learned from in my life and been lucky. And I think as a result, I'm a blend, I hope, of many of the people that have influenced me in the right way.
Sure. Thank you. Talk to me about the opportunity, how it presented itself to come on board at DMG. I think in 2010, was that correct?
Yeah, that's right. It was extraordinary, really, because after selling my business to Messe Frankfurt, I launched another business and sold that to Clarion. And then I'd always had a home for about 10 years plus in the US, and I thought I would leave and go to the US. My family liked it there, and I was actually looking to go. And then DMG came along and said, look, we want to do a complete restructure and review of the business. Would you come in? So I agreed. And in my mind, I thought that would be probably a 3-year deal. And I think, to be honest, in their mind, they thought it would be a 3-year deal because they knew I'd been outside of the corporate world for about 12 years. And I was probably no longer house trained and probably too much, in some respects, my own person and too entrepreneurial. And I couldn't see, because from an outsider, I always thought of Daily Mail General Trust as a very kind of conservative, traditional, not up for risk business. Great business, had huge respect for it, but not a cultural fit for me. But I'm happy to be wrong. I'm completely wrong. I have incredible bosses. My chairman, Viscount Lord Rothermere, just a wonderful, warm, and very funny human being, actually. It's terrific to be around. He has a huge sense of humor, always very kind, been kind to me for all 13 years. And the current CEO, Tim Collier, is just a fantastic person. And beyond the fact I like them, which matters to me, I have to work. If I'm going to work for a company and not do my own thing, it's got to be for people I admire and like. And I truly admire and like the leadership at DMGT. And I have to have freedom. I think anybody that's got an entrepreneurial spirit, they can't dumb down their freedom. If they do that, then they lose their identity. And the freedom they've allowed me has been extraordinary. And I've enjoyed all my time with them and still do.
Thank you. So let's talk about the first decade, if you like, up into the pandemic. Let's talk about some of the growth strategies, because obviously there has been significant growth that you've employed. Interested to know, when you first came in, what were the things you were looking at? If someone's listening, how did you go about setting that vision, both to yourself and to the organisation? Talk about how that works.
So when I came in, I hope my chairman and CEO forgive me if they listen into this, but I don't think they disagree, because I think it's the reason they brought me in. DMG Events was quite messy. It didn't have any real strategy. It was in too many sectors, but didn't have a lot of volume in any particular sector. So it was a little bit random, right? So you'd have kind of a gift show over here at one place and then a energy show in another place. They were not terribly compatible bedfellows within the portfolio. A lot of the shows were static and many were going backwards. And the turnover of staff was too frequent, and there was just a lot wrong. And it needed a complete reset. And I think what I enjoyed the most, sometimes they say, right, your perfect job, and maybe that's right for some people, go into a perfect company. Actually, for me, it's quite the opposite, actually. I really, really enjoyed the first 3 years of seeing, could I bring in people I trusted, and then could we completely reformat the business, just change the whole way of thinking, put forward a strategy, and so we did. So, the team I brought in was Chris Hudson, who'd worked for me 2 times before, who runs now quite a lot of the portfolio, a lot of the energy events. Chris is a real content person, and we needed to improve the content. And he just created amazing content in the energy events. And then I brought in another person I knew well, Matt Denton, who runs the other half of the business. And Matt's very entrepreneurial. And in recent years, has just launched a huge number of events in Saudi. He can sense and see a market coming and really get in quick and operate very fast. My CFO, Nick Ratcliffe, is just super smart, Cambridge grad, safe pair of hands, way cleverer than me, which isn't a high bar, but he is. And then we have a great CTO in Alistair Roylance, who looks at all the tech, all the systems. And so what we did is we did a lot of disposals in the first 3 years. We sold off things that we didn't think we could grow or that we were that good at, and disposed of them with no remorse, but made sure we found good buyers so they went to good homes. And then we looked at where we thought we could be good. And so we decided to have a sectoral focus. So 2 large areas we thought we could be really good in were energy and construction. So we really doubled down efforts there. And then we had secondary sectors of interiors, hospitality, coatings, and a couple of others. And so we narrowed down to a 6-7 sector focus and decided to become really good in those sectors. Really content rich, really customer driven, put on real quality events and have ambition. For example, with our ADIPEC show, which 13 years back was a national oil and gas show, probably ranking in terms of energy shows in the top 50, but not making the top 20. And today it's the largest energy event in the world. And we set out an ambition to do that. Never sure if we could achieve it, but it's good to have sometimes big goals and big ambitions. And today now it's transformed. It's not oil and gas anymore. It includes all energy. It talks about energy transition. It's a sensible, smart show, recognizing that you have to have carbon fuels today, but you can decarbonize and you can try and neutralize the effect, but you have to help a transition into renewables and you have to use the latest technologies. And again, the other thing we realized very quickly is that if we want to become respected within the sectors, you can't do it alone. You have to have incredible key stakeholders. with that particular show, our key stakeholder is ADNOC in Abu Dhabi, headed up by Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, who was the COP president. And he is also the Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology here. And he's just amazing. He gets ministers to come along. He is passionate about energy transition. And when you have those government key stakeholders that also understand the industry, you don't do it alone. You do it with their blessing, with their power, with their influence, and it just gets you there much, much quicker. So primarily we sector focused. We improved stakeholder relationships with ministries, governments. We improved the team dramatically. We have an amazing team now. And pretty much, if I look at 3 years after I joined, so 10 years ago, we finished all the disposals. We were down to a level of business. And over that 10 years, we've doubled the size of the business. It is more than 2 times larger than we were left with after disposals 10 years ago. And that's been pretty much all entrepreneurial launch and organic growth.
Sure.
And that's the way the DMG team are wired. Every team's different and every team is brilliant, right? I mean, Reed are absolutely fantastic at buying good properties and then bringing them into a portfolio, which is an art. It's not easy to do, and I know Hugh Jones very well, and he's a great leader. But for us, we're wired differently. We're all about organic growth and launch, which is great for me because that's what I enjoy. And all of our team heads are wired that way. They work for a corporate, but they act as if it's their business and as if they're entrepreneurs.
Sure. Thank you. And if I'm not mistaken, DMG is now within 25 countries, there or thereabouts.
Yeah, we are.
How do you? I was going to ask you how you go about choosing which location. There's lots of, over the last 2 or 3 years, definitely since the pandemic, lots of geo clones from other companies in the sector, lots of shows popping up within the UAE and Saudi Arabia. What's your view? How do you go about that thought process of say I'm going to take a show or launch a new show in a new territory?
So when we set about just over a decade ago writing the strategy, it was a multi-layered strategy. So one pillar of the strategy was about sectors that we thought we could be good in. Another pillar of the strategy was having a playbook. So what do we do to make those sectoral events good? So it was key stakeholders. It was about adding content, making sure they were content rich and that they appealed. So for example, if you take ADIPEC, make sure that you appeal to everyone in the industry. So you make it a very sticky, compelling show. So we have clubs for CEOs to attend, roundtables for ministers, conferences for strategists, conferences for technical management, conferences for women in energy, conferences for young people going into energy, zones in the show about technology, zones show. So part of the pillars are about content. And when we look around the world, another one of our pillars is we look at geographies where we think we can be successful. And we're also honest with ourselves where we don't think we can be successful, where we don't feel we have enough critical mass, experience in teams. So in sectors, we realized that we were best placed really within the Arabian Gulf. Our bigger and better shows were here. So we moved our head office from London to Dubai. That then put us right in the center of where we were performing better. And also strategically, it gave us brilliant time zones because my team can speak to Southeast Asia in the morning and they can speak to America in the afternoon. And there's not a lot of places in the world you can do that. And we can also fly direct all over the world, which is very important when you run events because even if you don't do events in some countries, you still get customers from many countries. And so the sales teams have to get out to countries we don't even operate events in just to bring those national groups along to shows we run. So very quickly we realized that we were strong in the Middle East. We built out our stakeholder relationships in the Middle East. So the natural progression for us became to look at adjacent markets. Saudi, for one, as you mentioned, Dan, it's been a big one. We went into Saudi pretty much a year after I joined, some 12 years ago. Very difficult early days, incredibly, but we persisted, we built relationships, and today we have about 20 shows in Saudi, and we have quite a good team and office there now. It's been a great success for us.
Sure.
We also, in our pillars of strategy, we also have 3 layers of timeline. So we classify things by near term. So in other words, we look at where we could have quick wins. So for example, if you've got a biannual show, but the frequency of transaction in that sector is increasing, okay, then the easiest market-driven thing to do is to annualize it. So it's a near-term win. So we look at what's a near-term win, and that could be, as I say, it could be annualizing. It could be adding an adjacency alongside the show. So you've got something that's compatible that will build out more exhibitors or more delegates. And we put that in a near-term bucket. So we analyze all the shows that are in the near-term bucket of 1, 2 to 3 years, where we can get growth by improving content or what we do to it. Then we have midterm, and midterm would be where we think we can get into a market quickly because we're near. Saudi was midterm for us some years ago, very near to our headquarters in Dubai. We can get in and out very quickly, build relationships very fast, can build out near term, so in the midterm. And then we look in strat at long term. What's like a long, long way away, but if you plant seeds today, can you reap rewards tomorrow? So if I use an analogy, if you and I had launched a business together some 30 years ago, we'd have jumped on a plane, rented an office in Singapore, and then launched shows all the way around Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. And at that point, there wouldn't have been great venues around the rest of the region other than Singapore. And all of it would have been quite early days and speculative, but we would have built out relationships across the region. And then when the region matured and the governance of many of the countries became solid, you would have had a big multi hundreds of millions of dollar portfolio. So if you look at that and let it teach you something, then you say, where's next? And I might be wrong, but personally, I think next is Africa. So I think you have to build it in Africa now. Know that many times you won't find great venues in cities, and many times you'll struggle sometimes with the right resources you need. But if you are open culturally and you embrace diversity and you work with people in the country properly and professionally and train people, and you make the relationships with the governments and with the ministers and you build trust, then 10, 15, 20 years from today, you could have 30, 40, 50 events across Africa in some of the bigger economies there that are growing every day, expanding every day, and you have a terrific portfolio. So that's our longer term strat is really at the moment is looking at Africa.
And obviously it's a vast area of land mass. Any specific countries? Obviously I had Trixie on from Dubai World Centre, and they launched GITEX Africa, I think in Morocco.
Yeah.
Not too recent, in the last couple of years. So I think she'd probably agree with you. Have you identified specific territories within that continent?
Yeah, so we try and, it's kind of, I mean, this is an awful thing to say really actually now, but because it's quite odd, but we sort of look at it as spread betting, because that's kind of what you would have done in Southeast Asia, right? Because no one knew a long time ago how things would work out in places like Indonesia a long time ago. Sure. I think now they do, but people don't look back 30 years. So we try and pick what we think will be the most significant economies in Africa. So we're operating very successfully in Egypt. So we already see that as a good win. We like that. We've got some great events there. We're operating in Nigeria because it is an incredibly populous country. I think 190 to 200 million people with a lot of natural resources as well. So we think has a lot of future opportunities. So we're active in Nigeria. We have a hub with a decent sized team in South Africa because South Africa does have some quite good venues and so offers opportunity. So we like South Africa. We're in Kenya. We think Kenya is interesting. We're also then in a whole variety of other countries. We're in Ethiopia, Tanzania, Mozambique. So we're spreading kind of our bets around. And we know that sadly, some countries will go through difficult times and it may not work out for us. And others will find a way forward, we hope, and progress at pace. And then we will work with the ministries and the governments in those countries and try and transact really good events in those countries to bring in the latest thinking and conferences and the latest products on the show floor and work well with government backing and stakeholders and try and do the very best we can to build our events for the success of our company, and we hope the success of the country we work in.
Sure, makes sense. Geoff, on the 21st of March 2020, and I came across this YouTube address or an announcement that you gave to your staff. I was listening to it the other night, the start of the pandemic. You said the one thing you can be sure of is that events will play the most important part in the marketing mix going forward. That has been borne out. What made you sure that face-to-face events would remain crucial during that time, even with the rise of virtual?
I think because, one of my sort of hobbies is kind of reading history books, some of the fun ones actually, where you've got good stories. Everyone loves a good story. And so in a lot of time when crises happen, a lot of analysts' voices come out very loudly. And I have a tremendous disrespect for that, because often they're not based on historical data or research. They just appear on TV as an analyst and they say things like, well, after the pandemic, no one's going to travel. And they say, and after the pandemic, events are dead because everyone will go online, and they were already dying before COVID because the technology has moved on. And so at the beginning of COVID, the analyst voices were out there everywhere predicting the death of so many industries. Travel will never come back like it did, based on nothing, right? Based on no historical observations, not based on even things that are within our living history, like Spanish flu in 1918 or world wars. It's not the first time humanity has faced crises. And if you look then historically, what's tended to happen after things like, even going back to the 1300s and bubonic plague, after people were locked down, and again, this was the case after Spanish flu in 1918, after people were locked down for a long period of time, the one thing human beings want to do is get out. They want to travel and see the world again. They want to get together and exchange ideas. They want to meet in a restaurant and see their friends. Human beings are social animals, and that fact is at the very heart of why humanity has been a successful species, because it goes right back to when the early humans on the plains of Africa sat around campfires and showed each other things and told stories. They showed each other things like spears or bows and arrows, or when they started farming, they showed each other early plows or stone tools, and they copied each other and shared ideas. And that's the very basis of really pretty much where a trade fair comes from. It's the same concept from thousands and thousands of years ago as it is today, is why human beings have been such a successful species, because they share ideas, they share what they create as products, and they move forward. And it's vital to human existence. And so those analysts, I always knew they would be wrong, because if you look at moments in history, trade fairs as we know them today, they've existed really for thousands of years, but in the format we know them today really go back to the 1100s in Germany. And 200 years later along came the bubonic plague, and everyone said, no one in Europe will go out again, no one will travel, no one will go to these trade fairs and see the latest plows. It won't happen. And as soon as it ended, everyone went out. And that has happened, if you look at so many times in history, that people have needed more than ever before, in fact, after a crisis, to get back together, to share ideas, to collaborate, to cooperate, to move forward. And so my feeling was that after COVID, actually what you're going to see is not a resistance and lower numbers on trade fairs, which was the complete prediction from analysts based on no data. But actually what you would see was not them just coming back, but very likely they would be very important to people and they would come back stronger. And in fact, that's been, I'm pleased to say, borne out, right? I'm sure you've seen, Dan, numbers are up.
I want to move on to the team at DMG. And I've read that you or the company suggest that one of the key drivers of the business is being a home for entrepreneurs, and you touched upon it earlier. How do you go about creating that environment of innovation, do you think?
I think it's because everybody feels very much part of that. So sometimes, the ideas might come from me. Sometimes they'll come from the business heads, Chris or Matt. Sometimes they'll come from the SVPs. Sometimes they'll come from new executives to the business. And I think as an entrepreneurial business, we're open to everyone's ideas. And that runs right the way through the business, right? So it's not just about launching a new show. If someone's got a great idea, we'll look at it. But it's also about if someone's working on an event, we encourage all the teams as they go into the budget process not to treat the budget process as a boring numbers game, but more to look at it as a point of reflection and to say, okay, you've shut the door on last year's results and some things went well and some things probably didn't go well. But what ideas came from you, your customers, other people around you, your colleagues? What can you do new, not just entrepreneurially and come up with a new show idea, but with your own show, what gives it a refresh every year? Sometimes we put the challenge out, can you come up with 5 new ideas for your show? And it's a game of no consequences other than positive, because if the ideas fail, there's no recrimination, right? It's just that we think all shows need to stay fresh. All shows need innovation and creativity. All shows need an entrepreneurial attitude. And that if we keep trying to push the envelope and trying to be better and make the shows more fun, then hopefully we deliver a better experience. We don't always win, but we've got to try.
Sure. And I don't know the exact number of staff that DMG Events have got. Maybe you can let me know. But ultimately, you've got lots of staff across different territories, different regions. How do you go about building and maintaining a cohesive team across different markets, making sure that everyone's buying into the overall vision of the company?
It's quite tough, and if I'm honest, I don't know on that axis we all succeed, right? You have to admit sometimes when you're not necessarily winning, and something, it's a good question you ask. It's something that's been on my mind because, particularly as a CEO, you can't be everywhere. We have about 100 events, and so I can only get to some of the larger ones. And I also want to be active with UFI and CISO and other associations to build up our network. And so sometimes you don't get to some of your team's events, and maybe they feel understandably that you don't connect with them and they're neglected. But there's not a lot you can do about it because you can't be everywhere. And so it is a conundrum. One I haven't, if I'm honest with you, Dan, and I should be, right, I haven't truly solved. Sure. I think we trickle down a lot, through good leaders across the business. And I think good leaders in our business take care of their people to the best of their ability. You can't keep everyone happy, but we try. But it is a conundrum. I want everybody to understand the vision of the business. I want everybody to be on board. I want everybody to feel appreciated. Whether I achieve that, I don't think I do. And I think it's something I have to go into the next year thinking about.
Yeah, it's always work in progress, but thank you for your honesty. Yeah. You referenced CISO and also UFI, and over the last, I think, 11 months, coming into you've been president of UFI. And for those that don't know, that tenure sort of you hand the baton over, and I think you're handing over to Hugh Jones of RX at the next Congress next month. Give us your reflections as you sort of enter the last period of your tenancy as UFI president over the last 12 months.
It's been amazing and a huge privilege, and something I didn't expect actually, because again, if I have to continue in a self-critical vein, when you're wired as an entrepreneur, sometimes you're kind of, as a lot of people describe, kind of head down, bum up, right? And you don't look around, and you don't, and you live in your own world. And so I wasn't a really great joiner in with associations, and I can't put it any other way. I just wasn't, and never really had any interest. And then COVID came along, and I wanted to get it out there that events would come back stronger than ever before. I wanted people to know that. I wanted people to be comforted by it, but I also wanted to work with the industry to see us all through this together. And so I became more involved. I realized it was necessary to talk to others, share experiences, particularly about how you dealt with running shows during a pandemic, because otherwise every company has to learn everything alone, whereas actually a lot of the learnings could be much more quickly shared. So I became active, and then I got really encouraged by Kai Hattendorf, the current CEO who's been amazing, and I really like Mary Larkin, who's amazing, a really wonderful woman, who also said, Geoff, come on, get more involved, work with us. Monica Lee Muller of Hong Kong Exhibition Centre, Michael Duck, who's put in a big shift with UFI for a long time, and I got to know these people better and understand them better, and realise what good hearts they have and how much they care about the industry. Made me realise I should too. And then they shocked me because I thought, well, I've only been active for a few years, right? So I'll probably be boxed up and cremated before they consider me as a president.
You know what they say, Geoff? You know what they say? No good deed goes unpunished.
Yes, maybe, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So that was your reward. I just want to. You mentioned Kai Hattendorf, who announced that he's stepping down as CEO, and only today, as I said, sitting here on October the 1st, a few hours ago, it was announced that Chris Skeeth is taking over as CEO of UFI, and obviously he spent 10 years as the CEO of AEO. I have to get all these acronyms right. Firstly, talk to me about Kai's impact, do you think, on the industry, and then how excited you are that Chris is joining.
Kai's impact's been huge. I mean, UFI's been lucky, right? So it's always had good leaders, but Kai's been quite transformative in terms of really pushing out there. He's been a big deal on advocacy. It was very important during COVID to advocate for the reopening of events because a lot of governments were understandably nervous. Everyone gets that. But he advocated for the value of events and for trying to get a reopening back quickly so that, particularly, I think, always a lot of the larger businesses were bound to survive. But I think many of those of us that were in the larger businesses also have been entrepreneurs before in smaller businesses and didn't want to see any of those suffer and ultimately maybe sadly fail. So Kai's advocacy has been extraordinary. The changes he's made in UFI have been terrific. It's just been, I don't think they could have had a better CEO. They've been very, very lucky. And personally, I really like Kai and I've really liked working with him. And he's been incredible during my presidency. He's made it easy. He's made it comfortable. He's guided me and I will miss him.
And then, as I said, it's been announced that Chris Skeeth, who was CEO of AEO for 10 years, is taking over. How excited are you that Chris has given us some thoughts on that appointment?
So it's a complete mix of relief and excitement because when you lose someone as great as Kai, you worry, will you get another great leader in the seat? So part of it is relief because I think Chris is just so right. He again advocated for events in the UK and received a OBE as a reward and recognition for services, quite rightly so. He's a terrific association leader. And so we passed from one incredibly good association leader to another. So I'm relieved and excited. And I don't think it could have worked out any better because the relationship with Chris and Kai is excellent. It's really, really good. They like each other. They respect each other. They work well together. So the handover, again, is going to be super smooth and really, really good. So the news we have today that we've known for a little bit of time and been working on for weeks because we interviewed both people inside UFI and outside. It's been a process, as it should be. But we got the right person, and I think Chris is going to be terrific.
Thank you. And the UFI Global Congress in Cologne is in a few weeks in November. What do you think some of the discussions are going to be around on the shop floor, so to speak, with your peer group and others within the industry? What's some of the trends that you think people are going to be talking about?
I think the great thing about the UFI Congress is while they've evolved is that if I go back a few years ago, a lot of it was the industry talking to itself. There's a value in that. There's no question because you have people who've been around a long time that can offer, ideas and advice to others, and that has a value. But the thing is, you've got to take outside voices, and you've got to hear, new thinking, new ideas, lessons from other industries that have maybe gone through other situations that you're currently going through. You don't have to learn everything for the first time. You can take other people's learnings and adapt them. And so now, what I love about the Congress, and particularly this one, is that it's a mixed bag. So you've got some industry veterans and experts talking on topics that they're well positioned to talk about and share their learnings. And I think that will be great. But then we have outside voices. We have people talking about global trends which we have to observe as an exhibition industry. We've got to understand the global trends and be able to use and work with those to make sure that we produce good events. We have economists speaking about what lies ahead. We need to know that. We have people talking about technology. And this is another thing that I go on about a lot, is that because, a lot of people said COVID would see the end of events, but people 10 years before COVID were saying technology was going to see the end of events. And I didn't believe that either, because when the printing press was invented by Gutenberg in 1440, one of the first pamphlets that came out was saying that no one will go to trade fairs in Germany anymore because they'll read about it. And that wasn't true. And so technology is an amazing thing, actually, for events. What the events industry's got to stop doing is imagining that technology is going to kill us, and have a more attitude that technology is going to improve us. Because the printing press in 1440 saw events suddenly start happening in Belgium, France, the Lowlands, the Netherlands, all over the place, because people could suddenly print things and promote them. And so that technology didn't see the end of events. That technology saw the first big period in the 1400s of the growth of events. That was a period that they started spreading across Europe. And the technology we have now, it's the same again, is that we have a huge advances in technology, and that will feature in the program. And they will bring in incredible changes for the event sector, and they will all be positive, and they will all be about driving growth.
Thank you. Just in the final part of our conversation, Geoff, I'm interested to just talk to you about leadership. Obviously, you've been a leader of many different businesses over the past number of years, 2 or 3 decades, not to age you. How do you think you've evolved, and or have you evolved your leadership style over the years? If you look at Geoff 30 years ago, maybe in his first leadership position, to where you're at now, talk to me about that journey.
Yeah, I think I have evolved a lot. I think, as we talked about earlier, which was a great question you asked, is like, what are you really? And I think I'm a composite of other people to a large extent, or I try to be. I don't always achieve it, but I try to be a composite of the best bits of people I have. And I've learned a lot. I think you have to be open to change. I mean, that was one session that came up in a past EFI Congress about, if you want to change an organization as a leader, you have to change yourself first quite often. And if I look early days, when I first went into events, a long time back, and sadly I'm really old now, I launched 5 computer shows on the bounce, and they all worked. And I learned nothing, because, and in fact, if anything, it was bad for me because I got arrogant, and I thought that I had the Midas touch. And then I had a massive failure, and I learned to not be so arrogant, to pay more attention to the market and not believe that I can move a market on my own, be more market conscious, listen to my people more, my teams more. So I adapted then. And over the years, as I say, I've tried to pull the best bits of people I've been around and try and incorporate them into how I operate. And so, I always want to learn, and I always want to change. I realize when I look in the mirror, there's one thing I can't change, that I'm getting old by the day, but I can change my mind still before it goes. And I think that's what every leader's got to accept, is that you have to be open to change and to new ideas and new thinking.
And talk to me about moments of self-doubt, because we all experience them. How do you handle those moments? What strategies do you use to overcome them?
It's sometimes difficult. I remember in my first business, I had a period in which I was absolutely terrified, because we had launched a series of shows, and then 3 years into the business, 9/11 happened, and that was obviously terrible for the people that suffered losses. But for the events industry in the Middle East at that time, a lot of companies around the world didn't want to go to the Middle East. They were very scared. They didn't understand it very well. And I'd spent 3 years fighting with all the money I'd got, everything in my life vested in the business, and exhibitors stopped coming. And I was staring in the face of bankruptcy after working day and night, weekends, evenings, everything to try and build a business. And I was just terrified. But I think the only thing I really learned was just faith, really. A terrible thing to say, right? Because the statement doesn't have much content, really, because it doesn't give a magic wand. It doesn't tell you what you can do. There's no explanation. But I think it's just belief and faith. You just have to keep working away, keep trying, just keep battling, and just facing adversity. I think for everyone it's different. For me, it's just mental toughness, just to try and get yourself through the worst of times and be optimistic. Always believe that if you try hard yourself, and also ask others for help, never be afraid. Ask others for help, reach out. You'll be amazed and surprised at your own resilience and what you can do, and also pleasantly surprised about others that will be out there that will help you and give you a helping hand.
Interesting, thank you. And I think, that sort of takes us full circle when you open up about sort of your upbringing and maybe some of the struggles that you had then as well. I guess that that's probably run throughout, I guess, your career. Yeah. And finally, in terms of looking back over your career, Geoff, if it's possible, what would you consider your greatest sort of achievement, personal highlight?
I think I like to live in the now, and I think it's now. As I say, I thought I would stay at DMG for 3 years. I think DMG thought I would stay at DMG for 3 years, and it just surprised me at what a nice organisation to just work for. The team I have, I couldn't wish for a better team. I'm really, really lucky. Every day they work hard and try hard. We've grown by about 36% this year, which is extraordinary. If I look around the business, everyone puts in a shift. I just, as a CEO, what you always want to do, right, is feel proud. And I'm incredibly proud of my team. And I don't tell them enough. It comes back to what you asked earlier, right, Dan, which was a great question. How do you connect with everybody? I hope they watch this, right? So, and I'm sure they will. I know a lot of, I'm going to say this to everyone. I know a lot of people that watch your podcast, and I think they're brilliant. And so I hope my team watch this, because I really do want them to know, but I often know I don't say it enough or communicate it enough, that I don't think I've ever worked with a better team. They're absolutely amazing. I think that's the highlight of my career, is that I'm currently in the job I love with the team that I've never seen any better output or any more commitment.
Sure. And I guess that continues to motivate you and inspire you to carry on all these years, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I love it. It's great.
Geoff, thank you so much for giving us the time that you've given us today. Covered a lot of topics in rapid succession. We wish you the very best for the future, and also we hope you have an enjoyable and an informative UFI conference in November in Cologne.
Thank you, Dan. It's been really nice being with you. And I say, I absolutely love your podcast. I think they're wonderful. And I think they connect so many people's ideas around the world in the events industry. I think it's terrific.